So this week, we are going to spend some time looking at the summer reading requirements for summer 2020 for students that are attending Pencrest as ninth graders next year. So I have prepared this slideshow to kind of walk you through your different options and any requirements that you have. But I've also included a separate slideshow of book trailers. So please, if you are on the fence about any of these books, go check out those book trailers. It's a separate slideshow in this folder that can kind of help you to decide as you're making plans for your summer reading. Now, also in the directions at the beginning of this folder, I have given you options for how to tackle this assignment if you are not attending Pencrest next year, if your plan is to go elsewhere for high school. So please go back to that direction video if that's your situation and make sure that you understand what I'm asking you to do this week. But we're going to get started with the requirements for summer reading. So the first thing is for all levels. So if you are going into accelerated, honors, or college prep, they are asking you to choose one of these 5 books. So everyone who is going to Pencrest in ninth grade should be reading one of these 5. Okay, 5 different options, very different from each other. You'll notice that some of the names of the authors might be familiar to you because they have been visitors for our visiting author program. Some of them may just be books that you've seen other students reading or you may have read yourself. But on the whole, I would say these are relatively well-known books. They're easily accessible, and there really is something for everyone here. So we're going to go through these options together. I'm just going to kind of explain them to you so that you have a better idea of what you're choosing from. The first selection is called Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. This book is a fantasy story. It's pretty lengthy, but really action-packed. And I would say it's kind of in the dystopian genre. So if you are someone who likes books like that, if you remember in 7th grade when you studied dystopian literature, if that's something that really appeals to you, this is probably your book. It's the first of a series too, so if you're someone who enjoys getting kind of deeper into a series, this might be the way to go. So let's take a look at the summary. They killed my mother. They took our magic. They tried to bury us. Now we rise. Zele Adebola remembers when the soil of Orisha hummed with magic. Burners ignited flames, tiders beckoned waves, and Zele's reaper mothers summoned forth souls. But everything changed the night magic disappeared. Under the orders of a ruthless king, Magi were killed, leaving Zele without a mother and her people without hope. Now Zele has one chance to bring back magic and strike against the monarchy. With the help of a rogue princess, Zele must outwit and outrun the crown prince who is hell-bent on eradicating magic for good. Danger lurks in Orisha, where snow leponairs prowl and vengeful spirits wait in the waters. Yet the greatest danger may be Zele herself as she struggles to control her powers and her growing feelings for an enemy. So I really enjoyed this book. I've read it, and I know several of you have borrowed it from my classroom library. And then there is a follow-up to it that just came out about a year ago. So if you are someone who enjoys the fantasy genre or dystopian, this might be the choice for you. The next book is called A Long Way Gone by Ishmael Baya. And this is a true story. So this is a nonfiction memoir story. So he wrote this about his own experience as a young person. This absorbing account by a young man who, as a boy of 12, gets swept up in Sierra Leone's civil war goes beyond even the best journalistic efforts in revealing the life and mind of a child abducted into the horrors of war. Baya's harrowing journey transforms him overnight from a child enthralled by American hip-hop music and dance to an internal refugee bereft of family, wandering from village to village in a country grown deeply divided by the indiscriminate atrocities of unruly, sociopathic, rebel, and army forces. Now, I will warn you that this is a war story, so it is dark and heavy, and there is quite a bit of violence in this book. But it is also a true story of a young boy who's growing up in Africa in the country of Sierra Leone, his country has tremendous civil strife, which means that different forces in the country are fighting against each other and the government. And so ultimately, this leads to a gigantic war, and children are swept up into it. And so he becomes a soldier in the army. It's a really moving story. Again, I've read it and I think it's really powerful, but I will say it's very sad too. So just bear that in mind as you're making your selections. I think that if you're interested in nonfiction stories or you're interested in war stories, this might be a story that you would enjoy. Next up is Phoenix Island by John Dickson. Now, you guys might not know this, but John Dickson actually used to be a teacher at Springton Lake, and he actually also taught in our classroom for several years. That was his classroom, Mr. Dickson's classroom, before I started teaching at Springton Lake. So our classroom is actually his classroom, and I think that's kind of cool. So you share that in common with him. Now, this story is a little bit sci-fi and a little bit action-adventure, and I think that you will really like it if you enjoy action-packed stories. So this is Phoenix Island. A champion boxer with a sharp hook and a short temper, 16-year-old Carl Freeman has been shuffled from foster home to foster home. He can't seem to stay out of trouble, using his fists to defend weaker classmates from bullies. His latest incident sends his opponent to the emergency room, and now the court is sending Carl to the worst place on earth, Phoenix Island. Classified as a terminal facility, it's the end of the line for delinquents who have no home, no family, and no future. Located somewhere off the coast of the United States and immune to its laws, the island is a grueling Spartan-style boot camp run by sadistic drill sergeants who show no mercy to their young orphan trainees. So this is, again, like sort of an action-packed story. I think it's really great for students who enjoy page turners. And again, I think it's really cool that we have this connection to John Dickson as somebody who, used to work in our school and used to be a teacher in our classroom. So that's Phoenix Island. The next book is Sleeping Freshmen Never Lie by David Lubar. You might remember Mr. Lubar came to our school as a visiting author a few years ago. He tends to write pretty funny stories. I will tell you that this one is kind of a mix between serious and funny, but definitely enjoyable. It's realistic fiction, and it's about a kid going to high school. So I think it's very relatable to somebody who's in your shoes as you get ready to, take off for high school in a few months. Starting high school is never easy. Seniors take your lunch money. Girls you've known forever are suddenly beautiful and unattainable, and you can never get enough sleep. Could there be a worse time for Scott's mother to announce she's pregnant? Scott decides high school would be a lot less overwhelming if it came with a survival manual, so he begins to write down tips for his new sibling. Meanwhile, he's trying his best to capture the attention of Julia, the freshman goddess. In the process, Scott manages to become involved in nearly everything the school has to offer. So while he tries to find his place in the confusing world of high school, win Julia's heart and keep his sanity, Scott will be recording all the details for his siblings and your enjoyment. So again, realistic fiction, kind of relatable to someone in your shoes, and some funny scenes. I think it's a really great book for somebody your age, particularly if you kind of feel that sense of, I'm not sure where I fit in here. This might be the book for you. And finally, your last option is Endangered by Elliot Schrafer. Remember also, Mr. Schrafer was a visitor to our school at the Visiting Authors Program. He worked in Africa with primates and spent a lot of time researching them and researching the people who work with primates for his books. So you might recall some of the photos that he shared, but this story is based on those experiences. After 14-year-old Sophie leaves her home in Florida, where she lives with her father, to visit her mother's bonobo sanctuary in Congo, she rescues a young bonobo from its captor. Sophie names her new friend Otto, and the two bond. But after civil war breaks out, Sophie and the young ape must flee from the sanctuary and attempt to survive in the jungle against overwhelming odds. With cruel revolutionaries everywhere, Sophie's life is constantly in danger. So the story of Endangered is a lot about animals and living in another country, but it's also kind of action-packed as Sophie is trying to get away from the different adversaries that she faces that are trying to capture Otto and also use her as a pawn in their battles with each other. So I think that you'll really enjoy this book if you enjoy action stories, but also it's an animal story. And so for those of you who really love animal stories, this might be something for you. Now, those are the 5 options for students that are going into all levels. If you are not taking accelerated English 9, so if you are a student who is planning to take College Prep English 9 or Honors English 9, you can stop watching now. These are your choices, and that's all you need to worry about. But for those of you who are taking Accelerated English 9, stay with me. We have one more book to talk about. So for students who are going into that accelerated course, you are required to read this book, Tell the Wolves I'm Home. This is a really beautiful story. I really loved this book. It's about a young girl who does a lot of growing up after she loses someone really important to her. Again, a little warning, it has its sad moments, especially in the beginning, but it definitely is a powerful story, and I think it will really resonate with a lot of you, and art plays a big role in this story, and I know for many of my students over the years, they're very talented artists, and so they really relate to that part of the story. This coming-of-age story reveals the striking pangs and promise of an adolescent girl's fitful awakening to adulthood. For 14-year-old June Elbis, the early death of her beloved uncle, artist Finn Weiss, blotted her world. When, shortly after the funeral, she was approached by another friend of the painter, she took comfort in their sharing of their loss. What followed, though, was unexpectedly intense. This is a really great growing up story. I think you'll really enjoy it. Definitely memorable, but it is the requirement. So if you are taking Accelerated English 9, this is not optional. You should still choose one of those 5 stories, and then in addition, you're reading this book. Okay, so just like we had last summer, a required book, and then choices. This is the same sort of thing, except they've kind of narrowed your choices down. Okay, so if you have questions about any of this, please reach out to me. There is an activity for you to complete, a reflection about the choices that you're making in this assignment. So please also visit that reflection page and make sure that you complete it so that you get credit this week for your work. If you have any questions, reach out to me. I hope you have a great week. Bye, guys.